Let me start by just expressing how honored I am, how happy I am, how energized I am from being here in Phnom Penh. This is my first trip. I've been here now almost 30 hours. So it makes me extremely humble to pretend to talk anything about Cambodia after 30 hours in the country. So mostly I will talk about my frameworks, the theories I've been working on, and I will share a little bit with you how Cambodia looks inside that framework. So there is a certain logic of the things that happen in the process of development of countries, especially modern development, and it's going to be a circle. I'm in control, okay. It's a circle, so it doesn't matter where you start. I'm going to start with better health. Typically, when health starts to improve, we see the beginning of the demographic transition where fertility rates decline. Fertility rates declining means now that there are fewer younger people, more people of working age, so there's more, a larger labor force per capita. In that labor force, there's more female labor force participation because there are fewer children to take care at home. And there is the ability now with two parents working with a smaller family to invest in the education of those children. And in the next generation, you'll have more educated women, and consequently, their opportunity cost of not going to work is higher, so you have more female labor force participation. All of that means more workers per capita because there are both more people of working age, and among them, there's more women working, so there's more workers per capita. Typically, with more education, there tends to be more urbanization because the returns to education tend to be higher in urban areas, and there's an easier adoption of technology. And with that, you get more income, and with more income, it's easier to invest in more health and so on. So this is a virtuous circle, and in that virtuous circle, we all focus as a metric on GDP per capita, but GDP per capita is really the consequences of the working age population as a share of the total population, which will be affected by the demographic transition, by how many of those of working age actually work, which is the labor force participation rate, and then on the productivity of those workers, okay, the GDP per worker. And this GDP per worker is going to depend on how educated are those workers, how much capital those workers work with, and how much technology those workers work with. Okay, so that's just a way of describing where countries are in this process of development. So I'm going to look at all of these dimensions in the context of Cambodia. Let me just make sure that since we have the World Bank present here, if there's anything wrong, it's their fault, not my fault. I'm using the World Development Indicators. I'm going to be measuring things in terms of, because I'm going to look at different dimensions, I'm going to measure everything as the shares of the US. So the US is one, okay? I chose the US, I could have chosen high-income countries. It's just, I want to choose something that moves with the world technological frontier, because over time, in these long periods of time, there is progress. So the first thing you note here is that all countries are kind of converging towards one. They're converging towards one. I've put Cambodia with low middle income countries and with East Asia. And you see that Cambodia had a very difficult history in the 1970s, but it's been converging, and it's been converging faster than low middle income countries. It's getting closer and closer to East Asia. Okay, so that's life expectancy. In fertility rates, you see something similar. There was, again, problem in the 70s, but everywhere you see fertility rates declining, and these are, again, our shares of the US. The US was also declining. And again, Cambodia was higher than low middle income countries and has converged, and now it's below low middle income countries, getting closer to East Asia. So that's another kind of repeating theme. This is female labor force participation. And here Cambodia is actually a world example, because the US is at 1, you're at 140% of the US. So there's more female labor force participation in Cambodia than there is in the US. So you're a world benchmark. Okay? And that means that in terms of labor force participation, you are above the US. So there's more people participating in the labor market as a share of the working age population here than in the US. And that's interesting. Part of it is explained by the fact that there are fewer younger people in education and more of them working. So this may not, as you expand your educational system, this may not stay there. But in any case, you have more workers per capita. In education, we see also convergence. Here, I'm comparing you with a few countries in the region, but I note that progress in education, at least, again, blame the World Bank, has not been as rapid as in other parts of the region. So I take that as a note. Same story more or less in tertiary enrollment, university enrollment. There's been a lot of progress in East Asia, and in this case, Cambodia has not caught up with lower middle income countries. On urbanization rates, we see a similar thing. So urbanization seems to be going more slowly than in other parts of the region. So education, university education and tertiary education, and urbanization are going more slowly. In the case of employment in agriculture, which typically decline in the process of education, that has happened quite rapidly in Cambodia. And again, we see this pattern. It was above low middle income countries, now it's below low middle income countries. In capital output ratio, there's how much capital do workers work. That's been converging very nicely. So the convergence there has been very important. So that means that you're pretty much converging in everything, in working age population and workers per capita. And we haven't seen GDP per worker, but we see convergence in education a bit more slowly than others. A lot of convergence in capital. We don't know yet about technology. So let's look. Everything seems to be converging, and Cambodia is converging. It's still not at the level of low middle income countries, and it's converging vis-a-vis the US, but not necessarily vis-a-vis East Asia Pacific. But it's converging. It's getting closer to 1, right? It's moving up, and if it keeps on growing at 6%, it will keep on converging. Now, you might say, well, you know, that's kind of normal. It's frequent in East Asia, but it's not normal for the world. I have taken here all the countries starting in 1980, and I've grouped them in quintiles of how fast were they growing, with the top quintile being the yellow quintile, and this is everything measured relative to the US. So the top quintile of countries have been converging a lot. The second quintile has almost not been converging, and all the other quintiles are falling behind the US. So you're really in the top quintile of world performers. So you're converging, you're in the top quintile of world performers, and that's an important message. So you're converging in life expectancy and fertility and female labor force participation and workers per capita and capital per worker, and also in GDP per capita. But we note that education seems to be growing more slowly, urbanization seems to be growing more slowly. So we still see very large gaps in GDP per capita, and at PPP it's about a factor of 10 between you and the US, so there's still a big gap. And we wonder, you know, what could be that gap, given that all these other gaps are narrowing. But these gaps tend to be underpinned by technological differences. So, this is a way to look at gaps in income per capita. You see two people doing what presumably is the same activity, agriculture, but doing it in two very different ways. So you might say technology might be at the core of these income differences. But what is technology? Well, I mean, there is a typical way to describe these things in economics. One way to describe it is that one worker works with more capital than the other. He might work with more land than the other. He might work with more education than the other. So you see capital, human capital, labor, etc., as your descriptions. And those descriptions, I like to think of it, is a very classical way of looking at the world. It's as if the world is composed of the fundamental substances, the five essences, the earth, water, air, and fire, and that's what the world is made out of. I'm going to take the view that the world is actually made out of something like this. It's made out of like atoms. And the difference between these two views of the world is that these atoms tend to combine and give rise to molecules and so on. And these molecules tend to combine into longer molecules. And if you put many of these molecules together, you might get a cell. And now if you put these cells together, you might get a cute animal like this one. And if you put more of these things together, you get something like that. And when you put enough of these animals together, you get something like this. Okay? So that is that through this process of combination, you have the emergence of things that were not there at the lower level, right? So that's, in essence, a change in the description of what you think that the economy is made out of. So at the core of this description of the story, you might want to say is technology. But I'm going to change a little bit by what I mean by technology. And I'm going to say that what I mean by technology is just knowledge. It's the knowledge we use to change the world from the way it is to the way we want it to be. Because you want the world to take the shape, say, of a hamburger. But there are no hamburger trees. If you want a hamburger, you'll have to make a hamburger. But to make a hamburger, you'll have to know how to make a hamburger. You'll have to use knowledge to transform the world, to transform the meadow into wheat, into cows, into milk, into cheese, into tomatoes, right? You'll have to transform the world. The knowledge we use to transform the world is what we call technology. Now, this knowledge is going to take three forms. In the world, it's going to take the form of embodied knowledge in tools and materials, meaning that the knowledge to make the tool is already in the tool. You don't need to know how to make the tool to use the tool. The knowledge to make the tool is stored in the tool. It's embodied. Then there is a second form of knowledge, what we call codified knowledge. It's in the codes and the recipes and the formulas and the algorithms and the manuals. So it's been codified. It takes the form of, it lives in some symbolic space. Like, if you show this to an architect, he immediately sees things. This is ink over paper, but it's not in the ink, it's not in the paper, it's in some symbolic space. Now, if this is all that technology was, the world would be technologically flat because we could take the tools and ship them around, and we could take the codes and just put them on the web and share them, right? And anybody with a smartphone would have access to the codes, right? But actually, there's a third form of knowledge that I haven't mentioned, but that you realize when you ask yourself the question, what do you do when your tooth hurts, right? And one possible answer is that you ask your husband or wife to download an article from the web and follow the instructions. I strongly recommend against that, right? You go to a dentist, right? And the dentist uses tools. The dentist follows protocols, but the dentist mixes the tools and the protocols with something that you and I probably don't have, which is the ability to look into the mouth and see things we wouldn't see, and the ability to use the tools in ways we wouldn't know how to. That third element is what we call know-how. It's something that exists in brains and only in brains. It doesn't take any other instantiation. As Malcolm Gladwell likes to say, it takes 10,000 hours to become good at something. And 10,000 hours at 40 hours a week is like 5 years. And so it takes a long time to become good at one thing, right? That's one of the reasons why your dentist tends not to be your lawyer, right? So know-how, by the way, know-how does not involve comprehension. Here is the new tennis star, Alcácer. He's a fantastic tennis player. If you have a 1-hour conversation with Alcácer, I can assure you that your tennis game will not improve. So this know-how is not information. It's not something that moves very easily, right? As I said, it takes 10,000 hours. But technology requires really not individual know-how. It requires team know-how. You might say that this lady knows how to implement that technology. But the truth is that in order to implement that technology, you need all these other people. So implementing technology is not an individual game, it's a team game, where you need all the people that span all the necessary knowledge to do things. So I'm going to argue that know-how is going to be a fundamental ingredient of the development process. I'm going to want to measure it, I want to know how it gets accumulated, and how does it orient your strategy. But before that, I have to give you some intuition of how to measure it. So I'm going to compare two mythical people. One is this Inuit from northern Canada, and here's the Inuit engaged in food production. Here's the Inuit engaged in housing construction, and here's the Inuit engaged in the transportation industry. And I want to compare the Inuit to modern man and ask myself, who has more know-how? I would put it to you that sentence makes no sense, right? Because you have here a guy who has glasses, headphones, a shirt, a screen, a computer, software. He does not know how to make any of that. If you put this guy here, we don't know if he will starve to death or he will freeze to death, but he will not survive. So there is no practical sense in which you can say that this guy here has more know-how than this guy here. So it's not something you can measure at the individual level. But you can say that the society to which this guy belongs has more know-how than the society to which these guys belong, because the society to which this guy belongs knows how to make glasses, headphones, computers, shirts, software, etc. He doesn't, but the society does. The society to which these guys belong, everybody knows how to hunt, everybody knows how to fish, everybody knows how to make an igloo, everybody knows how to run a dog sled. So everybody has a fairly complete copy of the technology of their society in the head. But everybody has sort of like the same copy. So the punchline that I want to say is that a society knows more, not mainly because individuals know more, but because individuals know different. The society can know more because we put different bits of knowledge in different heads, and that's how we get a society that knows more than its individuals. That's how knowledge grows. So I like to say that I don't know how much knowledge fits in a head. I don't know if it's a gigabyte, a terabyte, a megabyte. I call it a person byte, okay? So it's what fits in a person. So it's interesting to ask yourself the question, how much knowledge is in a product? How many different person bytes do you need to make a product? If a product requires less than 1 person byte, it could be done by 1 person. But if it requires 10 person bytes, it cannot be done by 1 person. Then you have to bring people with different knowledge together to make things. The place where people with different bits of knowledge come together is the firm. And because that's not enough, we have to link those firms in value chains. So that's the process through which we aggregate knowledge. So there are some businesses that require maybe the knowledge that fits in a family. So these can be family businesses. no family is able to make these products. And you can say that no country is able to make this product. It requires so much knowledge because the knowledge that goes into making the turbines is so different from the knowledge that goes into making the landing gear or the avionics or the windows or the carpet or the toilets, right? It's a lot of different things. And you need to use that knowledge that's spread across many organizations to make things together. Now, I'm not talking about economies of scale. Now, this is a very big company in China. But if you take people and you move them around from one position in this production line to another, nothing much happens. But if you try to do the same operation here, you will hear the difference. Because people are bringing different bits of knowledge to the story. So I tried to capture these intuitions, what I like to call the Scrabble theory of development, okay? The idea is that these units of knowledge, these person bytes, if you want, are like letters. And so they're like productive capabilities. And to make products, you need to bring this knowledge together. You need to bring these letters together. So products are like words. They're made by putting letters together. That's the basic proposition. It's a little bit like the atoms and the molecules I showed you before, right? But so if you have only one letter, there aren't too many words that you can put together. But if I give you these other two letters, now you can make 4 words, and you can make 3-letter words. If I just give you one extra letter, now you can make 9 words. You can make 4-letter words. If I give you these 10 letters, I didn't do this manually, but the Scrabble website says that you can make 595 words that are up to 10 letters long. So that means that the more letters you have, the more words you can make, and the longer the words you can make. That's the intuition. So I'm going to describe the world as composed of 3 kinds of things. One kind of things is these productive capabilities, these units of knowledge, call them the letters. And then the place is composed of places. And places are just characterized by the kinds of letters that they have, or by what subset of the alphabet they have. And then there are going to be products, and products are going to be characterized by the letters that they require. So when I look at the world, I'm going to find that places are able to make the products for which they have the words. Now this is very interesting, because now here you see everything. You see that the top place has many letters, the bottom place has only 3 letters. You see that the top product is a long word. You see that the low product is a short word, right? Now notice that the place that has a lot of letters can make all 5 words, all 5 products. So it's more diversified. The place that only has 3 letters can only make the word hat. Notice that the long word, pharmaceuticals, and we actually cheated because it was too long, is only made by one country. And which country makes it? The country that has many letters. And the short word hat is made by all countries. So what we learn is that places that have more letters are more diversified. Products that require more letters are made in fewer places. They are less ubiquitous. They are made in fewer places. And places that have more letters are able to make products that are less ubiquitous. They make products that are harder to make, made in fewer places. So that's the intuition I wanted to get. And by the way, so now that we have this theory, we can go to the data. And this is the data. You see on the x-axis is how diverse you are. On the y-axis is how ubiquitous are the products that you make. You see the rich countries tend to make many products and products that are made in few countries. The poor countries are making few products that are made everywhere. And that's a shape that you would expect if the world is made out of letters. And the same is true at the subnational level. These are municipalities in Santiago. These are states in Mexico. Again, at the bottom right is the richer part. At the top left is the poorer part. These are cities in Istanbul, in Turkey, I mean, same story. So with this, we can figure out which of the products in the world are long. Those are made in few places, and places that are very diversified, and which ones are short. They are made in many places, and places that have few letters, consequently they are poorly diversified. So we can calculate how complex is a product, and we can calculate how complex is a country. How many letters does a country have? And here you see very quickly say that Germany has more letters than Spain, that China has more letters than India, that my country, Venezuela, here is quite red, doesn't have too many capabilities, and so on. So we have an index of economic complexity. We find that on the x-axis, on the left, I showed you the countries in terms of how fast they grow, in quintiles of growth. On the right-hand side, I have the same countries, but in terms of what happened to their economic complexity. And you see that the yellow countries, the ones that grew a lot, are the countries whose economic complexity also grew a lot. So this process of growth is related to this process of accumulating letters, expressing them in more words and expressing them in longer words. More diversity of production towards more complex production, okay? That's what happens at global level. We see that Cambodia is converging in terms of economic complexity, okay? Its complexity is going up, and that's good news. And it's narrowing its gap with other countries in East Asia, say, like Philippines, okay? So it's moving in the right direction. So now I hope I have convinced you that this, when you want to think of your development, you want to think about really how many productive capabilities have spread in your society, and how are you able to transform that in more products and in more complex products. How does the process happen? How can we accelerate it? Well, I'm going to argue that to solve this problem, you have to address this conundrum, which is this chicken and egg problem. But you'll immediately realize that I made a mistake, because this is not a chicken, it's a rooster, but you'll forgive me, okay? So the idea is you have these three animals, and you need to classify the animals. There are two animals who are very close to each other, and one animal is very different. And the question is, who are those animals? And when I ask this question, people often say, well, you know, the lion and the zebra are from Africa, the bear is not from Africa, so you might say the lion and the zebra. Or other people say, well, the zebra eats grass, neither the lion nor the bear eat grass, so they're a different trophic level, they call that. But that's using a different theory. If you apply the Scrabble theory, you will realize that a zebra is just a bear with an extra Z. So if you want to go from bear to zebra, you just need to solve one chicken and egg problem, okay? But if you want to go from bear to lion, you start with 4 letters that you don't need, and you need 4 letters that you don't have, right? So bear to lion would be far away, bear to zebra would be closer. That's the intuition. The question is, how would you go out and represent that intuition? So we developed this metaphor, which is that every product is like a forest, is like a tree in a forest. And what you're really after is, what is the map of this forest of all possible products? And that forest of all possible products is what we call the product space. And we estimated a way of describing that product space, and this is our current representation of the product space. Every circle there is a product. At the bottom right, you have garments. Next to it, you have textiles. Here to the left, you have electronics, you have chemicals, you have minerals, you have machinery in blue in the center, you have agricultural products to the right. So everyone there is a product. And now that we have that, we can ask ourselves, where are countries in this space? So to do that metaphor, we think of a country as a collection of companies, firms, and firms that produce these products. So in the metaphor, countries are a collection of monkeys that live in some trees. Okay, so I can use this and ask myself, where is my own country, Venezuela, in this space? And I have marked the areas where Venezuela has capacity, and I've left in gray the other ones where it doesn't. And you see that it's pretty gray. Okay, so Venezuela, I come from a country that doesn't have too many productive capabilities. Compare that to, say, Spain, and you see that Spain, this is Venezuela, Spain has much more color, right? So I can ask myself, what about Cambodia? Well, here's Cambodia. So it has more color than Venezuela. It has that garment cluster well developed, and it has capabilities in other parts of that space. Okay, so now let me show you how society progresses, how these monkeys jump, okay? And I'm going to show you the monkeys jumping by comparing Ghana to Thailand, okay? And these are two countries that started at very similar levels of income, and but Ghana is a country that invested more in education than Thailand. So actually, it grew in education more, in schooling more, and education in Ghana is in English, while education in Thailand is in Thai, and it's a beautiful language, but not too many people outside of Thailand speak it. So you would have guessed that if it was just education, Ghana beats Thailand. So Ghana was exporting mainly cocoa, wood, and some minerals in 1962, and Thailand was more diversified, but exporting essentially raw materials and minerals in 1962. This is where they were in the product space back then, in 65. Now I'm going to show you a movie of what happened since 1965. So I want you to pay good attention at these places where you see where it's highlighted that there's a monkey. So 65, 70, 75, 80, 85, 90, 95, 2000, 2005, 2010. I don't know what you saw, but let me go back. So here you have 65, 70. Now you've got two monkeys there in the garments cluster. Suddenly they spread through the garment cluster, now more in the garment cluster. Now they start here in the electronics cluster in blue, and boom, now they've taken over all the electronics cluster here. And now they're starting to move into car cluster in the center, and so on. So what happened is that Ghana diversified very little. This was 62, this is 2010. Exports per capita in Ghana didn't move. Thailand started here, they ended up here. Complete transformation of their export basket. And they went from exporting $50 per capita to exporting $2,500 per capita, 50x. So now Thailand is 7 times richer than Ghana. So the process of transformation, you could not have guessed it by just looking at educational data. You had to look at what it is that they were able to do, what happened to their ability to do things, different things. Okay? So in Cambodia, we see a diversification process. The apparel cluster is still there, but now you see that you were exporting $300 million in 1995. Now you are exporting 24 billion. That's almost 100x. And you've been diversifying more. And these are some of the things you've been diversifying recently into. So we calculate how many new products you added in the last 15 years. 21% of your export basket are things you were not doing 15 years ago. And it represents $373 per capita, $6.3 billion in new exports. So this is the reason why you have been converging and why you have been growing. Now, it means that really you don't have to look only at how you have added value to your raw materials, but the process of development is different. Here I'm going to compare Finland to itself. And one way to think about, and by the way, I came from Indonesia, and this for them is really important because they think of development as adding value to the raw materials. Finland is a country that has many trees, few people, many trees. You would say, you have a lot of wood. What can you do with wood? Well, maybe cut it in slabs, maybe make it into furniture, maybe transform it into paper. And that's one way to think of progress. You add value to your raw materials. But a different way of thinking about your progress is that you had a lot of wood. Because you had a lot of wood, you needed tools and machines to cut wood. But tools and machines to cut wood, you move to tools and machines that cut other things. And maybe from tools and machines that cut other things, not just wood, you move to automated tools and machines that cut. And from automated tools and machines that cut, you move to automated tools, because there's more to life than just cutting. And from automated tools, you end up in Nokia. So the top line is you're adding value to your raw materials. The bottom line is you're adding capabilities to your capabilities. You're adding capabilities to your capabilities. So we use the product space to figure out which things are in your nearby possible and which of those things are attractive for you to get into. To how can you continue having the monkeys jump in space, and what can you do to facilitate those transitions, solve those chicken and egg problems. Now, this is something that happens in many countries. This is the market share of China in the world, and you see that they got into garments first, they got into electronics, then they got into machinery. In Thailand, they got into garments first, then they got into electronics, then they got into machinery, and then they started abandoning garments. But we worked a lot on Sri Lanka, and they got into garments, and they got stuck in garments. They got kicked around in garments, but they didn't continue moving. So this is some way in which countries can get trapped. They are unable to continue the movement in the product space. Okay? So Cambodia got into garments, and it increased its market share in garments. The question is, will it be able to move into other things? You're improving in agriculture, but we don't see the same dynamism in other areas. So this is part of what we see going forward. Finally, I want to say something about how to accelerate the process. It's very hard to get know-how into brains, but it's very easy to move brains. So the mobility of technology is facilitated by the mobility of people. The way Detroit became the motor town city of the US is because people who worked for Oldsmobile left Oldsmobile to found Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler. Okay, so the reason why you have a Silicon Valley is because some people moved into Silicon Valley. The first guys created Fairchild Semiconductors, and those people ended up creating all these other companies. In Bangladesh, you got 126 Bangladeshi workers who worked for 6 months training in Korea for Daewoo. They went back to create a company called Desh in Bangladesh. Within 10 years, 56 of those workers left to create their own company. And what happened is that textiles now represent 95% of exports in Bangladesh. But it happened through these people who learned how to make garments in Desh and left the company to create their own company. So foreign direct investment, mobility of people is an important way to advance. There is two other ways. One is through migration, and the other one is by using your diasporas. We looked into growth through diasporas in Albania. There was an economic crisis in Greece. Greece had a lot of Albanian immigrants. With the crisis in Greece, these Albanian immigrants returned to the US, to Albania. So it was bad times. You would have expected that 5% of the Albanian labor force returned in 2 years to Albania. You would have expected wages would have gone down or unemployment would have gone up. Actually, what happened is that unemployment went down and wages went up, even though they got 5% more labor. Why? Because the people who came with different experiences, different knowledge, and they learned about how to do agriculture and greenhouses and stuff in Greece, came back with that knowledge. They used that knowledge, they hired their neighbors, and there was a growth acceleration. So you don't have too many migrants coming into your country, but you do have people abroad. And the people abroad, the diaspora, is getting experience in industries that may not yet exist in Albania, in Cambodia, and it's a process of acceleration. That's what happened in India. It was the Indian diaspora that helped diversify India. So you have a diaspora in different parts of the world. They may be a source of new letters, new ideas, new possible combinations. A diaspora strategy might be very useful. There's also other things you can use for your benefit. The world is trying to de-risk China. They want to have China plus something else policies, and we are starting to see that happening already in Cambodia. This is the market share in the US. What happened to market shares in the US? The Chinese market share fell, but some other countries were able to capture market share in the US through this mechanism, and this is another theme going forward. So, in conclusion, countries do not grow by making more of the same. They tend to change what they produce when they grow. They become more diversified. They are able to develop more complex products. We can map these options, and we can develop strategies to get to where you want to go by understanding where you are in the product space, what's nearby, what would it take, and so on. So follow us in our websites, in our tools. The graphs I did with the Atlas of Economic Complexity. I hope this is something that might be useful to you. Thank you very much, and really good luck in your journey. Thank you.